Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today it's time for Rank at the Devil. I'm going to be ranking the studio albums of Motley Crue from worst to best. Let's get things started here. Coming in at number 9, I'm going to go with New Tattoo from 2000. This was the band's first record without Tommy Lee on the drums, who was just an absolute mess around this time period here, with legal and personal issues, even serving jail time at one point, which still can't be as bad as Methods of Madness. But anyway, with Tommy Lee out of the band, Crue decided to recruit Randy Castillo, formerly of Ozzy Osbourne's band, for New Tattoo, and apparently, there were still some hard feelings between the band and Mick Mars after the Swine recording sessions, because Mick claims to have had minimal involvement with this record himself, not being allowed in the studio with the rest of the band, and so Mick doesn't play much on this album, unfortunately, but, Nikki Sixx's initial intention with this record was for it to be, the album that Motley Crue should have made to follow up Dr. Feelgood, but unfortunately, it's a far cry from what they'd done 11 years earlier, and, I've tried with New Tattoo, I've really tried with all of the post-Dr. Feelgood era albums, and, I just can't get into them for one reason or another, but in the case of New Tattoo, the lyricism is just atrocious. I mean, this is the band returning to more of a glam metal approach, lyrics and all here, but, it's different because they weren't 25 anymore. That's the thing. It's not as fun or catchy when you're in your 40s and have shown minimal growth in the songwriting department. Case in point, look at the lyrics on tracks like Treat Me Like the Dog I Am and Drag Strip Superstar. It becomes parody at a certain point. It's like Crue jumped the shark here with New Tattoo, which, of course, unless you're the Fonz, usually doesn't work out well. Coming in at number 8 here, we have the much maligned Generation Swine from 1997. Just real bottom-of-the-barrel stuff for Motley Crue here. Most people have it ranked dead last. I just think New Tattoo is a little bit worse, but honestly, it's like comparing bad apples with bad oranges, so, whatever. They're both terrible records here. This was the first to feature Vince Neil back in the band since his last appearance on 1991's Decade of Decadence, and the final with drummer Tommy Lee until 2008 with Saints of Los Angeles, and amongst the album's many issues, and there are a lot of problems with this record, there's definitely a bit of a songwriting disconnect here, as, most of the material was written while John Corabi was still in the band, and Vince Neil had some difficulty adjusting his voice to fit the album's sound here. This is Crue trying to update their sound, experimenting with more of an alternative and industrial sound. It was the mid-90s after all, but it's an embarrassing record. The band sound out of their element here. Mick Mars barely plays on the album's final cut, and there are 2 tracks here featuring Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee on lead vocals respectively, with Sixx singing lead on Rocket Ship and Tommy Lee on Brandon, which is definitely a contender for the worst Motley Crue song of all time. The whole thing is a mess, and despite the original lineup being reunited after pressure from the record label, Crue were lost here, like so many of their 80s hair metal counterparts around this time were, and it definitely shows. Generation Swine, a disastrous record, my number 8 on the list, just awful stuff. Like I said, really bottom of the barrel Motley Crue here. Number 7, let's go with self-titled Motley Crue from 1994. Crue's only full-length studio album with John Corabi on lead vocals, and there are people who really like this album. Personally, I don't love it or hate it, but I would have been interested in more of Motley Crue with John Corabi down the line, more than just one album, but I think Corabi and the band allowed for Motley Crue to experiment a bit with different lyrics, really branch out. And I definitely dig the more abrasive sound on this record compared to their previous releases. The success of the grunge scene definitely did have a big influence on this record, pulling from the legs of Soundgarden and Pearl Jam. But the unfortunate thing is grunge was kind of on the way out by mid-94, and the record didn't sell well, with a lot of fans initially not accepting Neil's firing. It didn't sell well compared to the band's earlier work, leading to the record label believing John Corabi was not a star, which I don't think is really fair. I do think time has been kinder to it now, with a lot of people picking up a newfound appreciation for this era of Motley Crue. I'm not a huge fan, but I appreciate the contrast it creates, compared to the rest of the Crue catalog, and so for that, I think it's a very interesting and unique record, so kind of refreshing and different in my opinion. Coming in at number 7, we have to go with self-titled Motley Crue 94 here. Decent stuff, the only album with John Corabi. Don't love it, don't hate it, but I do appreciate, the kind of dichotomy it creates in the catalog. Number 6, let's go with Saints of Los Angeles from 2008. It's their most recent studio album to date, and I don't have any reason to believe the band will ever follow it up with another full-length record. They seem content now, just putting out the odd single or EP every now and then, and just coasting at this point on the old stuff. But back in 2008, this was a step back in the right direction for Motley Crue. Their best album in 20 years at that point. You have Tommy Lee back in the band here, and so you have the original lineup back together once again, and it's not the greatest comeback comeback album ever made, but I think it's the right mix of sleaze with heavy metal to resurrect whatever's left of the classic Crue vibe here. Some standouts for me include This Ain't a Love Song, the title track, which is probably my favorite song on this record. Also, you have Face Down in the Dirt and Going Out Swingin', which is a really solid album closer. Saints of Los Angeles, though not a spectacular album, not a stellar comeback, is still a fun record with some great moments throughout. So coming in at number 6 here, let's go with 2008's Saints of Los Angeles. Like I said, their final studio album to date, and again, probably going to stay that way. I don't see the band making another full-length record anytime soon. Moving into the top 5 now. Now we're in the classic era of Motley Crue here. I got to go with Theater of Pain. Probably my least favorite of, their 80s output, but still, it's on a different level from the other stuff I've been talking about up to this point. It just has this dark cloud hanging it over it as, the Vince Neil Car Crash album, but aside from that, the band began their transition to glam metal with a change in image and, sound compared to Shout at the Devil and Too Fast for Love. It's not as raw or aggressive, but this album was one of those pioneering glam metal records of the mid-80s, big hair, makeup, a big MTV presence, cheesy lyrics, power ballads, the whole 9 yards, right? But it produced some of the band's most successful material, like Home Sweet Home and their cover of Smokin' in the Boys' Room, but also has some of the band's laziest lyrics as well, so there are some, tracks on here that I never need to hear again, like the 2 aforementioned songs, but I still dig tracks like Use It or Lose It and Tonight We Need a Lover. Favorite song on here, probably have to go with Louder Than Hell. Next up, Dr. Feelgood, coming in number 4 here on the list, released in 1989. The last great Motley Crue record, in my opinion, and they ended the 80s strong with Dr. Feelgood. A really fun album here with some great later-era hair metal material. Produced by Bob Rock, who had each member of the band record their parts separately. This album sounds big and full of life. The riffs are really strong, and the band were able to maintain a hard rock sound, with even more, melodic hooks throughout as well, which I think is good, to be able to maintain that sort of ruggedness as well. And this would be the last studio album with Vince Neil until Generation Swine. They would record 2 tracks for Decade of Decadence, but this is the last full-length studio album with Vince Neil until Generation Swine in 97, and what a massive difference 7 years can make, right? One of the band's finest hours with standouts on here, like my personal favorite, Kickstart My Heart, and then of course you have the classic title track, Without You, Same Old Situation, Don't Go Away Mad, Just Go Away. Great stuff here. At number 4, going to go with Dr. Feelgood. Top 3 now with Girls, Girls, Girls. Crue really refined their full-blown glam metal arena rock sound on this record, and it's the follow-up to Theater of Pain from 2 years earlier, produced by Tom Werman, who had worked with the band previously on Theater and Shout at the Devil. The album cover is cheesy with all 4 guys on motorcycles. I mean, the whole thing is very 80s, right? But it packs a punch in just under 40 minutes. The title track is a total earworm. Wild Side was a big hit on MTV, but, it's a song I'll never get tired of hearing despite being played to death, right? Other songs on here, you have Something for Nothing, and of course, You're All I Need. You gotta have that obligatory power ballad on there as well. One thing I really enjoy about this record is the blues rock influence throughout that made for a really interesting change to their sound that just adds another layer to the entire record. So, getting us started in the top 3. Like I said, once we're in 80s Crue, we're in good stuff here. So, number 3, gonna go with Girls, 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 a really solid follow-up to Theater of Pain. My 1 and 2 are very close together, so it's a super tough call, but Crue were never able to quite replicate the magic of their first 2 records, those being, of course, Too Fast for Love and Shout at the Devil. Not for lack of trying. Sometimes coming off as Super Force, which I talked about on this list, with some other albums, New Tattoo. But, these 2 are metal essentials, and so my favorite changes all the time between the both of them. But for today, coming in at number 2, I have to go with their debut album, Too Fast for Love. Incredible debut here. It has this very raw and gritty feel to it. Tommy Lee's drumming is just on fire here. Vince Neil's vocals sound great and distinct from the rest of the Crue catalog, as he was singing in a higher pitch throughout. Nicky's bass really stands out, and of course Mick is Mick. Favorite song on here, very tough. I either have to go with Live Wire or A Piece of Your Action. Really great material on this record. The whole album is, great back and forth between the faster paced songs, like I mentioned, and the calmer stuff like On With the Show and Merry Go Round. But I just think their sophomore album is a little bit stronger. And finally, coming in at number 1 here, we have Shout at the Devil. No sophomore slump here. As a matter of fact, this was the band's breakthrough album. From top to bottom, this album rocks. And, at the time, no one looked or sounded like like Crue, and this is the band really at the top of their game here. Every song on here is a banger. Favorite song has got to be Knock 'Em Dead Kid. Just an incredible track there, but, it doesn't get talked about as much as I think it should. I think it's got a great riff and a killer chorus as well. Some other standouts on here include Looks That Kill, the title track, Too Young to Fall in Love, a decent cover of Helter Skelter by the Beatles, and 10 Seconds to Love. So, just top to bottom, this is prime Motley Crue, and again, like I said, nobody looked or sounded like them at this time, and so they definitely did put a jolt in the Sunset Strip scene here, and this is the album that put them on the map. Shout at the Devil, incredible stuff that still holds up to this day. So, like I said before, my 1 and 2 are kind of close together between this album and Too Fast for Love, but today, giving the edge to Shout at the Devil, incredible sophomore record here, my number 1 on the list, my personal favorite Motley Crue album of all time. So that wraps up Rank at the Devil, ranking the studio albums of Motley Crue from worst to best. You guys can see my ranking right over here. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new upload. I'll be doing more discography rankings in 2025, a lot more than I did in 2024, so stay tuned for that, for more of these. It's a lot of fun, being able to tackle a band's whole discography, and for Motley Crue, they have an interesting catalog to say the least, so I was, intrigued by the, prospect of sharing my thoughts on all of their records. So, hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to share your thoughts on my ranking down in the comment section below, and what are some of your favorite Motley Crue albums? I want to hear from you. And until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.